Evening, everyone, and welcome. Our president, Mr. Bobby Lambert, is dealing with some travel issues, trying to get back to his house. He will jump on as soon as he can. So it's my pleasure to welcome you. And as always, let's get started with our good friend, Dr. Tim Lautzenheiser. Take it away, Tim.
Thanks, Steve. Words of wisdom. Talk about a thing called finishing the phrase. And we all relate that to music and not just stopping the note when it's done, but gently laying it down and so forth. But we can finish the phrase in all kinds of life. I will share this quick story because you'll remember it when it's a story. Being a gypsy, every other night I'm in a different hotel. So a couple of years ago, I was doing Colorado Bandmaster or Colorado Music Educators. And for those of you who have been in that great facility called Broadmoor Hotel out in Colorado, I mean, it's just first class and it's not a busy time for them. So they get a good price tag for us regular people. So anyway, I drove up to the front and three guys are around me right away here. We'll valet your car and everything. And being a farmer, I'm like, no, 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 I'll do that myself. And the one young man leans in, he goes, "You like Coke or Diet Coke better?" I'm like, Diet Coke, that's fine. And he go, "Okay, we're taking a survey." And so by the time I got out of the car, he had my keys. They unloaded the trunk and he grabbed my keys. He said, "I'll park this." I said, "No, I'll park it." He goes, "You don't have to pay for valet parking. Let me take care of it for you." And my buddy, Jock over here, he'll take you in and we'll get you signed up and in the room. Well, for all of you who travel, you know that's one of the pains of getting a hotel. You wait in line and then no, you have to go over to Sherry or whatever. So here comes Jack or Jock, whatever his name is. And he said, "Just follow me." And we went in and he said, "Here, just sit down on the couch. Give me your driver's license." He said, "I'll get you checked in." I'm like, okay. And when I sat down, he walked over. I didn't see where he went and came back and handed me a Diet Coke. He said, "Just relax." Well, you can imagine right now, I'm like, am I going to wake up out of this or not? So comes back. He wasn't gone 5 minutes. I don't know how he got checked in so fast. Comes back. He goes, "Come on, I'll take you up to your room." And I said, "Well, I got to get my luggage." He goes, "Oh, my friend already took that up there for you." So we go in the room, and usually the bags are set on something. The bags were open. My hanging clothes were hung up, and the bathroom stuff, all my dock kit and everything was set up. And I'm like, this is wonderful. So the whole day it kind of goes like that. Everybody just fussing over you, but nobody would take a tip. And every time I tried to tip them, because they live off those things, they're like, "No, no, no, you're our guest." So I get done with the thing and it's time to reward myself with food I'm not supposed to eat. So I go into this little shop and I said, "Do you have ice cream?" They're like, "Yeah, but we don't have the really good stuff. It's down the way. What's your favorite?" I said, "Well, black walnut, but you're not going to have black walnut." And they're like, "No, I don't know." They said, "But, we'll take, Allison will take you down to the other place where you got the good ice cream." And in the conversation, they said, "If it wasn't black walnut, what would it be?" And I said, "Butter pecan." So we get down there and they meet me at the door. Now, by now, they've got my name and they're trading this all around, making phone calls and everything. So I walk in and the young lady that was there said, "Hi, we've been waiting for you." And she hands me an ice cream cone that's like got three dips on it. She goes, "Here, this is for you." She said, "We found black walnut." "Oh, okay." I said, "How much do I owe you?" And she goes, "It's none, this is on us." So I'm like, I don't think I can get away with three dips of this stuff, even though I'm a hog. She goes, "Well, she goes, "You want to get down to the bottom dip because that's butter pecan." It was this way the whole time. So I went down the next morning and one of the guys was still there. They were trading shifts. And he said, "What time do you have to leave?" And I said, "Well, this is going to be faster. I got to get out and get to the airport." He said, "I'll have the car waiting for you. What door?" And so forth. I've never had that kind of um, polish on anything. Finishing the phrase, everything they could find out about me. And before I could even ask, it was served to me. What would that be like if we did that all the time? With everybody, we finish the phrase. The golden rule, treat everybody as you'd like to be treated. The platinum rule is figure out how they would like to be treated and treat them. So those are my words of wisdom. Let's finish the phrase and everything this week. Thanks.
That's wonderful, Tim. Thank you for sharing that with us. Love it. Uh, and now we're going to get some tips from our good friend Gary Gribble.
Who has to click on his audio. Now we're here. Good evening, everyone. Last time we talked about having a 1, 3, and 5 year plan. This time we're going to talk about knowing where you are before you start implementing your plan. So one of the things that I learned over time is that if you're not always assessing where you are, you're not getting a good feel for where everyone is in the developmental process, it's difficult to fulfill your goals, difficult to fulfill the plan that you have. One quick personal example, I was asked by one of the middle school directors decades ago to come in and help an 8th grade tuba player who just couldn't articulate. So we went into the practice room and I looked and I noticed that the embouchure looked really strange. So I said, remove the mouthpiece and buzz your lips. And he immediately stuck his tongue out and did a raspberry. He had been playing that way for 3 years with his top lip and his tongue as the embouchure. And that's why he could not articulate. Now, given the band directors at that time in middle school were one person per 500 students, so their classes were 100 kids each with one person, it's not surprising that things could not be observed every day in class for every child, and you couldn't get to that level of detail. But had there been some assessment along the way at any given time, one-on-one, the director might have picked up on that. So as you're making your plans for your program, you need to take a really good look at where you are. Honestly, where are the students, as far as their development is concerned, and where do you want them to be? And then what are the logical steps to get there? So I found it very, very important to see the kids one-on-one at some point in time during the year. A lot of folks would hire in people to do auditions. We have semester auditions. Let's bring in a panel of evaluators and look at the kids and, give us a score, and then we'll place them in a band. And if you didn't then take the time to bring the kids in at any other point in time, you really only heard them in class, and you could only assess what you were hearing from the podium. So knowing where you are means understanding the needs of every individual in the program, not just collectively our woodwinds are weak this year or our low brass is struggling or whatever, but number 3 clarinet John is playing with an embouchure that needs to be reset, needs to be addressed. And you can look at the components of your program the same way. Is our jazz band program where we want it to be? And, where are we right now? What do we understand? What are we capable of doing? And then you can formulate your plans and make good progress, and you can have a more concrete idea of what you need to do. Then the follow-up to that is develop that plan. If we need to develop these skills, what are the things we are doing every day during fundamentals, during our warm-up, and during class that is reinforcing that idea or those concepts that we need to develop? So if you are struggling with articulation in your group, then what are you doing in your plan to address articulation every day? How are you describing it? How are you teaching it? How are you reinforcing it? Are you giving enough practice for them to be able to grasp and develop the concept? And so that's the next phase. Once you know where you want to go, you have to assess where you are in order to understand and develop a curriculum that will get you farther along that path. That's my words.
Steve, can I interrupt for a second? Or I just did, so I guess I can't. Gary, that's perfect. And Steve and I talk about this all the time. I think a lot of people have the puzzle, but they don't have the picture on the box. Does that make sense? Does everybody
Absolutely.
know that when you said no plan, they're just trying to put pieces of the puzzle together each day. And we spend a lot of time and still we don't know what the picture on the box is. So we can't get there. So thank you. Appreciate that. That's a good one.
All right. Well, I am so excited for our guest tonight. Phil Clements is a dear friend, a master educator. He was recently named the executive director designate of the Texas Bandmasters Association. And we'll give him a chance to talk a little bit about the summer conference as well. For those of you who've never been, Texas Masters, Texas Orchestra Directors, and Texas Choir Directors do their conference during the summer. So it's like a mini National Music Education Conference. And if you've never been, you should come. San Antonio is a great place to be. But before that, he was director of bands at, let's see, Texas A&M University of Commerce, now to East Texas A&M, formerly East Texas State University, the school that keeps changing names. And then I was director of athletic bands at University of Miami, and then associate director of bands at UTA, which is where I met Phil. And he's going to do a great job with Texas Bandmaster. So please welcome tonight, Phil Clements.
Thank you, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm just thinking back to those UTA days, and Brian Christian and Steve Andre were leadership staff at our summer camps we ran, and Tim Lautzenheiser would come in and make a dash in, and it seems like yesterday, but judging by Brian's beard, I know that it's not. We've gone through several years since then. Well, I'll tell you just a little bit about TBA. If you've never been, we'd love for you to come. It's the largest summer music convention of its kind in the country. We have, when we put all three of the organizations together, almost 10,000 people that are in attendance over the summer. And it ranks either fourth or fifth each year as far as the overall largest convention in the summer. TMEA is usually first in Midwest, and I think Florida Music Educators is sometimes ahead of us, but it's right up there. And certainly for the summer, it's one of the largest, and we feel one of the best. The other thing that's really unique is we're aligned with DCI, so we have the DCI show with us at the end of the convention this year, and drum corps that are giving clinics, and just a lot of a great camaraderie too. Families come and make it an end of the year vacation before everybody starts back up. So just issuing the invitation to anybody who would love to come be a part of TBA. We would welcome you with open arms and lots of margaritas as well. They asked me to talk a little bit tonight and about really anything I wanted to, which I thought was a dangerous thing, but I appreciated that very much. And I thought I'd just talk a little bit about some of the things that I've been seeing. It's kind of clinic season for many of us, and time for those of you that are teaching to bring in clinicians. And I think everybody feels like you have to have everything perfect before you bring in a clinician. One of the things I've started doing lately is I would love to come work with your group, but I'm only going to do it if I can come early in the season as well as coming in the middle and the end of the season. Because I want to help, I want to hear the ensemble that's developing and be able to help offer some suggestions, not just at the end when things have kind of cemented themselves, but really throughout. But one of the things I notice as well is people tend to go in a certain kind of, for lack of better term, Maslow's hierarchy of band. All the notes have to be right, all the rhythms have to be right. Then we can add this, then we can add this. So I wanted to maybe visit a little bit tonight, and please interject with questions as we go through about how you can teach the music at the same time you're teaching those practical elements of making the piece come to life. It can't be a do one then do the other, an either or, but it has to happen simultaneously. So rather than look at me the entire time, I put together just a short PowerPoint that I'll share with you right now. And you'll kind of see the presenter mode, and I'm sorry about that, but I want to be able to see all of you at the same time that we go through. So hopefully you can see that well. I'll blow it up just a little bit, and you can increase it if you need to. And Steve, I'm going to just interject because I can't see the chat in this mode as well. So if somebody has a question or something, please let me know.
Will do.
Okay, great. I think the most important thing we need to think about is just to start with the big picture and really what we're trying to do. We're teaching people about music, and we're doing it through the vehicle of band. And I've heard Tim say that over and over and over. But we can never forget that we're not teaching band. We're not teaching instruments. We're teaching people, and it has to go in that order: people, then music, then band. And what I call the lasagna principle, I think, is one of the most important things. If any of you have any Italian heritage, you know the difference between a good lasagna and a bad lasagna. But what I find is that with a good lasagna, you don't add the meat and then put all the noodles and then put the cheese. The cheese goes in the middle. It's meat, then lasagna, or the noodles, then meat, then cheese, and et cetera, et cetera. And its music must be the same thing. We can't wait till the end to start to add the good stuff. It has to happen as part of the process. But and I think when we're kind of in the middle of the rehearsal battle, we tend to forget that, and we tend to get in a hurry, and we're trying to make sure that, everything that we need to be taken care of course, hand position and embouchures and notes and rhythms and silly things like that are in place. But we also have to make sure we remember we're teaching students about music. So to rehearse musically, I think there's just a couple of prerequisites. And we're going to skim the surface tonight, but my goal is that maybe I can give you just a few things that tomorrow you can walk into rehearsal and actually use. But I think to get in this mindset, we have to think about music all the time and not just band, but really listening to music, listening to great music, thinking about music, and how it's constructed. And we need to study the piece for what the musical intent is and boil it down maybe to just a character. What are we trying to get the students to feel? What are we trying to get the audience to feel? And start with the emotional side of it. And then the architecture, and that's everything from tempo to phrasing to growth and decay, but the bigger version of that, and the smallest version at the phrasal level. And this could be grade one. This is not necessarily you have to wait till you're doing the Hymn of a Symphony to do this. This can be what do you want this phrase to do at the beginning of a grade one piece. And then as teachers, we've got to create lesson plans and habits that integrate these musical concepts. Most of the things I'm talking about with the bands I'm working about right now are musical concepts. It may be, yeah, I know you're working on that in sectionals and we'll get there with that, or have you considered this? But it's really about how are you thinking about music making? And I spend less time talking about how to fix measure 41 than I do about how are you thinking about what you're doing musically as an individual player, as an ensemble, or challenging the conductor to think about really what they want. That puzzle that Tim was talking about, seeing that and understanding it before we get into rehearsal. Because if we don't, we're really just reacting to what we hear on the day and we're not being proactive about it. So we have to be intentional about what we teach and the importance we place on music making. I want to share with you a quote that I heard our good friend Julie Giroux say a number of years ago, and it has stuck with me, and I share it now with every honor band and almost every band I work with. And she said, if you take away the notes and the rhythms and the bar lines and the clefs and the keys and everything on the printed page, what would be left would actually be the music. And that would be the descriptive words, and it would be the dynamics, and it would be the phrasing markings and the articulation, the style markings. She said, that's what makes the difference. Everything else is just notes put in a different order with different rhythms. But when all those other things are removed, what would be printed on the page, and I think we can all visualize that, would be what really creates music in what we do. And I thought that that was just such a creative and wonderful way to think about that. And I think we understand why Julie's music has the impact that it does after seeing that quote. So I share that with everybody I've come in contact. I just think it's brilliant. So now we get to this part of it. Yeah, but I have to rehearse tomorrow, so all of this musical stuff I'll get to. So I just wanted to leave you some ideas about maybe some things you can walk in, some ways, some concepts you can begin to teach, or some ways to think about things in your rehearsals from middle school on up that the students really need to understand so that it's not starting over each time we get into rehearsal with a new piece, but they're really latching onto the concepts of what is it about being a good musician and a good ensemble member. So again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is just touching the tip of the iceberg, but maybe some things that you could take into rehearsal and get to work for you tomorrow. So one of the things that I start with first, and it's a little out of the ordinary for our Maslow's hierarchy of band, but it's balance, because I think when things are in balance, that the students can hear within the ensemble better, they can hear each other, and quite frankly, you can hear what's going on. A lot of times, if the dynamics are not set and the balance of the ensemble, it becomes really difficult for us as conductors to be able to hear what's happening. And then our only recourse is to take things so far apart that we lose 90% of the students in the rehearsal because we're down to hearing the third clarinets. So if we can work with balance first, that's going to allow them to make understand things, hear things better, and you to hear things better as well. I use the term protect the melody or protect the soloist all the time, and I've used it for many, many years, getting students to think about how their dynamics relate to really what's going on in the music. You know, we have the score and it says forte all the way down the column. And we know that the piccolo player shouldn't play forte, but the piccolo player sees forte. And I've decided this is enough off topic, but I'm going to invent what I call piccolo goggles. And the piccolo player puts them on, and it takes every dynamic and drops it by 3. And I'm going to sell them at TBA this summer and make a fortune. So if you need piccolo goggles, just look for my new booth. It's going to be terrific. But we have to teach those students how to listen for that. And so using that word protect the melody really becomes a selfless act of music making and not a selfish act of music making. I talk a lot about that with students, about being a selfless musician, and help them understand that the dynamics on the page are not really what they should be playing. They have to understand what their role is. Are they melody or counter melody or accompaniment? And I just start out, I want to teach them this concept. I said, if you determine you're the melody, play the dynamic. If you determine you're the accompaniment, take one dynamic off as a starting point. If you determine there's a lot of friends playing the same accompaniment with you, take another dynamic off. And if you're a soloist, add a dynamic. And if you just start with that, then we're going to get the balance without the conductor having to say hardly anything. So that's something that you can take in tomorrow and just try and ask them the questions. What do you think your role is? And sometimes they have no idea, and it takes time for them to start to listen that way. The other thing that I think is important is as we talk about phrasing and shaping and growth and decay, if you work to shape the phrases early on, you're going to create space for counterlines that exist naturally in the music. So as something is decaying in a melodic idea, most naturally there's something counter melodic or an accompaniment line that should be surfacing, and it will naturally be heard much easier from a balance standpoint simply by focusing on what we're doing with the melodic shape through that. So that's something that can happen just as an easy way of working with the melody. We create that space for counter melodies as we go through. And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is just maybe a few things to try as you go into rehearsal tomorrow. Dynamics, I talk a lot about this with students about the bass function, and I don't think that's talked about enough. Now, I'm a tuba player, so I live in the bass world, and I can't even remember where I learned this, but I did learn that the bass voice has to do things differently with when it comes to gradual dynamic changes. So bass voices, and this could be your bass clarinets, this could be your third clarinets, it could be your third trumpets, depending on what the texture of the music is. But they have to be ahead of the crescendo. They have to crescendo faster, and they have to delay the decrescendo. If any of you have had trouble with your band starting to sound really bright when you crescendo, it's because the upper voices are crescendoing at the same rate that the lower voices are. So having them delay their decrescendo, having the bottom voices crescendo first and then delay their decrescendo will help keep the band in balance as you add the dynamic contour to the phrase. And then the next one I work with students on is that crescendo plus and decrescendo are not equal. Even though we see them on the page like that, they tend to perform it just like that. They go up 4 and they go right down 4. And I always use the Grand Canyon analogy. We like us taking a trip to the Grand Canyon, getting out of the car, looking over the edge, getting back in the car and heading home and missing the point entirely. So what I teach students to do is if they have a 4+4 crescendo decrescendo, it's really a crescendo 4 hold at least 1 and decrescendo 3 to linger in that moment. And so if it's 8, then we just do math and we go 8+2+6. But just that simple concept of them thinking about how they crescendo and how they stay at the arrival point, then we can talk about harmonic tension and resolution. They can start to hear those things much easier. But this is back to how we're using air on wind instruments and just getting that. So everybody's, doing all their breathing exercises at the beginning of rehearsal. Work on a 4+1+3 rather than a 4+4, and then you can naturally put that into your rehearsals. And then dynamic resets, I use quite a bit. We tend to get noisier and noisier and louder and louder and louder as pieces go on if we don't look for those opportunities to reset the dynamics. And so I often talk with students about really what's the definition of crescendo. And you might try this, go into your rehearsal and just ask them to reiterate the definition of crescendo. And most will start with something like get louder. And you say, well, that's exactly right. But let's talk about how we do that. So then you kind of get to the point where it's, well, let's gradually grow louder. And I like to use the word stronger or fuller rather than louder, just for the connotation on that. And then I get them to think about start softer in order to gradually grow stronger. So that they start to think about every time they have a crescendo, they shouldn't necessarily start at the dynamic they see, but maybe a little bit below that to give them the maximum room for growth. So these are just four quick dynamic concepts that you can take into rehearsal that work in tandem with balance, and begin to craft some things very, very quickly, and then just keep coming back in every piece and every phrase and asking these questions over and over and over. So with phrasing, I try to put things in a vernacular that students understand, and I talk about direction of a line, but I call it musical GPS. And I want them to think about it in terms of, because they're so used to plugging something into their phone or into their car, and how am I going to get there? And most of the time, they can't read a map. I think we've learned that. I'm not even sure I could go back and read a map if I had to, one that you actually fold out. I know I couldn't fold it back up. That's for sure, because I couldn't do it when I had to do it. So we've got to get them to think about there's different ways to get somewhere. We've got to all have the same idea of how we're going. So you use that analogy of driving to this city and how many roads could you get to get there? Thinking about they have to understand what everybody else on the melody is doing and how when they're crescendo, when they're beginning the crescendo, and how long they're lingering at the top of the phrase or the quote musical Grand Canyon before they come back down. And then I'm sure you've heard this one. Every note is either a to note or a from note. And you can start teaching that in sixth grade. It's got to be moving towards something or moving away from something. Even arrival notes, to me, still have what I call micro crescendos in them to keep sustain at the same level. And then breathe. I think I heard Gene Corporon say this for the first time, but breathe with the end of the phrase in mind. So think about where you're going as you take that breath. And the breath, how we breathe, uploads everything we're about to do. I think we use the term breathe together, play together a lot, but really how we take the breath and the rate of the breath determines everything from whether we come in together to whether we can finish the phrase. And a perfect tie into what Tim was talking about earlier. Because finishing the phrase is where great musicians live. Everybody starts everything well. Finishing it is the difference. And then finally, listening for all the infinite ways we can enter sound and silence. So just getting them to get initially into these ideas is something as simple as going, do you think this note is a to note or a from note? And why? And starting to ask those questions in your rehearsal. And how long is this phrase? So what kind of breath are we gonna take? And what can we do to make that possible to get to the end of this phrase? And then the last one I'll share with you is just some ideas about style. I think clarity, we're always looking for clarity and transparency in our playing in our ensembles. And it's a result of correct timing and pulse and balance, but also really a lot of unified articulation. Our friends in the choral world figured this out much before we did, and they call it diction. And you've heard choirs that you can't quite understand what they're saying. And most of our bands, you really can't understand what we're saying because we haven't focused enough on our instrumental diction. And the consonants are the key. It comes down to it. We have two main choices. We can use a T or we can use a D. I like to use the terms lowercase t, capital T, lowercase d, capital D, just to get them to think about how forcefully they're using those articulations, and that we know there's lots of versions in between. But we have to be really specific with those things in the beginning consonant and the ending consonant. And then also beginning to teach them musically that it's not just about the note beginnings, but it's about the length of the note and the weight of the note and the shape of the note. And I can't remember how old I was before it finally dawned on me if I would play an accent the way it looked on the paper, that I would play an accent. And for years and years and years, and I would just play the front of the note in a quick decay instead of thinking, well, this is a whole note. Maybe I should just delay the decay a little bit, and started to think about things like that. So anything that you can put into that kind of construct for them, I think is great. But don't forget, these things have to be discussed while you're talking about that's an E and not an E flat or vice versa. Because if you add them at the end, it's not only unfair to the students for their musical education, but I think you're going to find a lot of things change. The balances change, and your intonation changes if we try to add a crescendo. We have to be in tandem with how we work through the pedagogical ideas and the practical ideas and these musical things, which can really be taught conceptually and not just something that's ethereal that we try to figure out is a surprise at the end. So that's just some things that have been on my mind as I've been out on the road and working with a lot of groups and middle school and high school, and thought it'd be a nice opportunity to share those thoughts. So I'll stop sharing my thoughts and also stop sharing the screen and see if there's any follow-up or anything anybody wants to add to that, and stop talking for a little bit. Yeah,
Go ahead, Brian.
So especially Phil, what you were talking about there at the end on addressing everything early and simultaneously. That Jerry Junkin did a clinic at Midwest one time and said, a lot of people think that they're going to have an intonation day and an articulation day and a phrasing day, and he's like, I have everything days, and that's all we have. So I think he's in sync with you on that, and addressing the music while we are addressing everything else is super important. Great job, Phil. Thank you.
well, thanks. And I think people start to think of it as it's like magic. And if they're a little unsure about what they want musically, they don't think that's something they can teach. And really, it's just about teaching concepts of musicianship and breaking it down to some of the basic fundamental things that we all know as musicians, but maybe haven't put into words a way that we feel comfortable with, or that our students can understand at whatever level they are. But this, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's a third band or a middle school band. If you can break the concept down far enough musically, they can understand the difference between to and from. And analogies help a lot. I've found as I go, they will remember those things. Like Tim said, remember the stories. So.
Phil, do you find yourself in the middle of these clinics teaching pedagogy in addition to the musicality? Are you having to stop and fix embouchures and hand position? And how do you incorporate that in
Those
half?
those things happen, and a lot of times it's ensemble skills that I spend more time. And then I'll talk if I see a student doing something. I walk around a lot during the warm-ups, and I may just you know in between something say something to a horn player about where their hand position is, or trombones about the speed of their slides, or I think a lot of people think slow music, slow fingers, and we've learned obviously to teach fast fingers with slow movement, slow music. But I think they also don't address like what we're doing inside the oral cavity, that the shift in vowel sounds also has to happen very, very quickly. Even really good bands I've noticed have neglected that a little bit. So I see all the fast finger movement, but they're not moving a Remington together, and it's because like especially the brass players are not shifting vowels quickly. So I have them sing and work on shifting tongue position as they go from one vowel sound to another. But yeah, pedagogies, it's always, and as Brian said about what Jerry's comment was, it's everything all at once. It has to be. We can't neglect one side for the other. I saw
Okay.
somebody had a hand up, I think is Steve, if you raised
Brenda,
a question.
fire away, Brenda.
Hi. Hi, Helen. I appreciate you talking about with the choir and band, especially at your school, if you have both, even an orchestra, spend some time with them, go into class, do an observant of what's going on, and how can that be applied to your class? because you're going to find the sound of your group will get better because of just it's not just band, it's not choir, it's not just orchestra, it's all together. We're all making music, and how can we all make it to sound like music as an ensemble, no matter what ensemble you belong in? And you can find making that better connection by trying out with the other groups. So I like what you just said. So thank you.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I've learned so much about teaching phrasing by watching choir rehearsals, and about diction too, how they taught diction. I said,
Mhm.
okay, I'm going to work on that with articulation. Yeah, it's music. We teach music. We teach people. Sorry, I go back to my first slide. We teach people about music.
All right, Jennifer, go ahead.
Thanks, Philip, for so many great reminders, but also some new gems that I was like, ooh, I got to go back 25 years and call some kids and
We
apologize.
all we
Sorry,
all
y'all. Let's go back with
No, we all do.
those dynamics. My bad. But I'm wondering how you approach festivals, conducting short term. Because a lot of some of the things you were saying are kind of things you have to build over time. But if you're going in for 2 days, and average to upper, but of course we like all grade 5 6 people, but you know a group that's solid kids, good kids, but maybe not the best. How do you handle that in a short amount of time?
Yeah,
What do you
in a
focus
lot of
on?
times, when I go to a school, my goal is not to just work with the top ensemble. Like if they have multiple ensembles, I want to work with all the ensembles because I think, a lot of times it won't be the same teacher. And I want to hear the vocabulary that each of the teachers is using with their ensemble. Number one, to make sure it's unified. And if it's not, I'll talk with the head director. But you need to have some vocabulary discussions because your concepts aren't going to translate as they move from one to the other. But I will tend to, if I'm working with a third group or a group that's not as far along, or maybe the director hasn't been there as long, just try to pick out three things that we can do. One in kind of each of those boxes. Maybe we're going to work on just understanding the role they play musically, determining whether they're accompaniment or melody, and then how to adjust a dynamic, and then what they should be doing with the balance, and just trying to get them to focus on something and then apply it to all of their pieces so that hopefully that questioning starts to go through there. We know that these building blocks take time, but I think grounding and this is what I call the sit dog principle. I have the lasagna principle and the sit dog principle. If you've ever tried to train a dog, there's a point after saying sit dog 1,000 times, the dog actually sits. But if you just stop too soon and you don't continue to say it, then you're never going to get there. So we have to constantly be saying things to our students that to us sound like common sense, sounds like things we've said over and over, but we realize that, oh my gosh, I've never said this to this group. I've said it to every group that came before them, but I've just never taught that concept. So I think having a list of musical concepts you're trying to teach throughout the year, just like you do for we want to learn these scales and we want to be able to get this from a range standpoint and teach flute vibrato at this tempo and double tonguing, all those instrumental things and playing skills. Having the musical skills list, I think, is just important, and we can check those off and remind ourselves whether we said it or not.
Thank you.
Okay, Brian.
It always takes me a second to put my mic back on. I just wanted to piggyback on what Brenda and Phil said about visiting other disciplines in their rehearsals. Another thing that I've noticed recently, especially, is kids are really smart. And I'll be doing a band class and they're playing a note too short. And I'll say, no, full bow, full bow. And I get an inquisical look. And then I was like, well, what does the bow relate to in what we're doing? And they're like, the air. I'm like, exactly. They know that. So, finding how things can transfer cross curricular, if you will, is sometimes just the light bulb that needs to get turned on. And then, oh, shoot, there was one more thing. Phil, you were just talking about the dog 1,000 times and everything. Another thing that drives me crazy, I've seen several of my uh, clients, you'll tell them that they'll tell the kids to do something and they'll do it and then they'll go right to the next thing. And I'm like, Wait, they did they do better? Did you like what you heard? Yeah. Well, tell them. You
Mhm.
know, you've got to reward the behavior that you like, and so that they'll repeat it. So I really liked that about the dog. I need to remember that. Just keep on trucking.
Yeah, Brian, I would add to that. I think that's they do that, or they just start running a punch list and they give them information and then they don't even stop to give the kids a chance to apply that information. They just go to the next thing on their list, right? So, yeah, I just yeah, to echo um the lasagna thought. I really my first course of my doctorate was about brain research and how and it just really was a major kick in the side of the head because it was like basically how all of us were taught in my mind, in my estimation, was completely backwards of what we really need to do because we all agree in basic psych class, we all learn that abstract things take longer to learn than concrete, right? Okay, so what do we do? Notes and rhythm, notes and rhythm, notes and rhythm. Oh, now we're going to add the abstract things 2 weeks before festival for the evaluation because now we need to polish it. Well, when you take that into some other research that I wish I had learned to cite things earlier in life, but basically it says it takes 8 sequenced repetitions to create a habit and 28 sequenced repetitions to break a habit and create a new one. So then they're toast. And the reason the trombones aren't playing in tune, the piccolo's not balancing, is because we gave them way far too many reps without ever asking them to think about that. And we don't have enough reps to break the old habit and create the next one. And it's not their fault at all, it's ours because abstract takes longer to learn. And we have to create habits with the full lasagna with the cheese in every layer. Yeah.
For the most part, unteaching is impossible.
Yeah. Anybody go
You,
through an embouchure change in college? Yeah, exactly.
yeah, toughie. Phil, if
How'd
nobody,
that embouchure change go for you, Tim?
pardon?
How'd that embouchure change work out for you,
Well,
Tim?
just to be for all of us percussionists, I learned traditional grip. Went to college, they flipped it to match grip. That's an embouchure change for me. To this day, if it's a hard part, it'll flip back. I don't even know it's happening, but that was the first habit I learned. And to override that, now the minute I flip back, I just erased all the good I did. It's like Phil was talking about the rock roll to the bottom of the hill, and up we go again. Yeah.
Well, we're just thankful, Tim, that you stopped using the brass mallets on the rosewood.
Know what it's for? Phil, tell us about drum corps,
About drum corps.
your experience.
Well, Tim and I share a little bit of a common past in that we were both members of the Blue Devils. I was obviously a lot before Tim was involved in the corps, isn't that right? I think that's correct. But yeah, I grew up early on in my formative years. I started marching drum corps when I was 14. Somehow convinced my parents that that was going to be okay, and marched for 4 years and taught some drum corps, taught marching band for many years before I finally stepped away from that. So um, probably the rest of the things I can't share in public, Tim. I think that's probably about it. About it.
Well, I just want, the people go, oh no, it'll ruin everything. Did you feel it benefited you as a band director?
Oh, absolutely. Some of the best ways of teaching brass and teaching music I learned
Mhm.
from two of the instructors. One was Wayne Downey,
Wayne, sure.
if you know that name with the Blue Devils, and one name you may not know was John Simpson.
Oh yeah.
Taught this with the Skywriters, who was a middle school band director and was just voted into the Hall of Fame for DCI not too many years ago. Unbelievable brass player and pedagogue and ensemble technician. And I found with students over the years, it can do one of two things. If it's the right staff, it can make their playing unbelievable. If it's the wrong staff, it can be detrimental. And so I think you have to look, if you have students that are going off to drum corps, really take a look at that. And I think where we are now, I mean, it's 99% great people teaching because they're also teaching all of the great bands across our country. So there's not as much of that as there used to be, but yeah, many things I learned I took from those experiences early on as a brass player.
And for you drum corps aficionados, Phil married Dorothy.
Yeah, my wife actually, but we met teaching drum corps, and she marched in the Skyriders after a year or two after I did, and if you've ever seen the West Side Story show from Skyriders in the late '80s, she was Maria in that show, and Dorothy in the Wizard of Oz show, and all of that. So she understands what I do and what I've done, and has a great appreciation for it. And
Phil, take just a minute to talk to us about the Young Director Academy that TBA does for anybody that's a young director, or if you've got a student teacher that's going into the field and going to start their new job. Talk to everybody a little bit about that real quick.
yeah, we've got several things that are accompany the convention. One is our Academy for New Teachers. So anybody that's entering their first year of teaching has an opportunity as part of the convention. They spend the first day, and it's kind of a crash course on the things that they probably should have learned in college and maybe did and forgot, but things to professionalism. For our purposes, what's the difference between UIL and TMEA and the different acronyms that they may know but may not quite understand. So we have those executive directors or leaders come in and talk to them. Tim spends some time with them, and they get a chance to visit with him. It's a wonderful opportunity, and so many folks that have come through that have just raved about it. They walk away with an enormous amount of material from that, and feel, I think, a little bit better prepared to walk into that first day of class. We also have something that David's involved with, our Booster Institute, which is a wonderful deal. For $100, you can send as many boosters as you want to, and they come and they spend a day with David and helping them with everything from how to set up committees, accomplish goals. And David, you can talk more about this than I can for sure, but we're very fortunate to have him involved with that in the Booster Institute. And then we have a student leadership day as well. That's part of the convention that we have lots of different folks involved in helping prepare future leaders and the current leaders who are about to start into that. But David, you want to talk a little bit more about the Booster Institute while we're mentioning it?
Now maybe I can. There we go. Yeah, no, thanks, Phil. It's a great day. We kind of talk about the five basic things that we need to do throughout the day. We talk about to create a sustainable organization, right? Because that's the hardest part of how do we get from an oral history organization into one that functions like a small business with a serious music problem. And so we walk through just how to build blueprints and systems for making all that more effective and more efficient. So that's something of interest. It's a great day to get concentrated energy in. I just want to give an echo. I don't know if this is an oversimplification. I don't mean for it to be, but there are a lot of folks that are part of SLAM that go to Midwest every year. And from my context, I love Midwest. I didn't know anything about it early in my career because I was in Texas, and some of us in that timeline felt like we never needed to leave the state because there's so much great stuff going on there, right? But to me, I kind of frame it in my own mind of justification from a time because we're all struggling with time and money. But to me, I feel like Midwest is really focused on a lot of the artistic and a lot of philosophical kinds of things. But to me, I don't know that I've ever in my career, and I was fortunate my first 7 years were in Texas, but to me, the pedagogical force at TBA in the summer to just talk about pedagogy and deep dives with master teachers, I don't think there's anything that comes close to it in the country. And so, for those of you that are focusing on that, I really would want to encourage you. And I'm a Georgia band director, so I'm not trying to proselyte too much. But to me, I think the Midwest and the TBA are the perfect marriage of professional development, if you will, because it deals with the craft and the art. And so if you haven't ever been, I would really encourage you to try to put that on your plate if it's at all possible.
David, thank you for saying that. That's something the board of directors focuses really hard on, is making sure that those clinics are as grounded and practical, with the same idea that you could walk into your classroom tomorrow and do that. You know, I had the opportunity to serve on the board for 8 years. I was the president when COVID broke out, and we did our first virtual convention. And one of the mantras that came out of that, and I'll still remember the Zoom meeting when I said it. I said, guys, we've got to make sure that everybody understands that they need information, but we also have to have inspiration, because they've got to have both. And as soon as I said it, I realized that I just boiled down teaching into 2 words.
Yeah.
And so we focus on getting them the information to be a great teacher, but at the same time having the inspiration to go back and want to do that and want to continue in the profession. Because if we don't continue to feed that part of it, then we're lost. But you're right, David. It's something we focus a lot on, is making sure that it's the best teachers and the most practical information. And we bring our great Texas teachers. We also bring people in from out of state to help share new ideas and help us all grow, and as much inspiration as we can put into the mix while we're doing it. So again, an open invitation to anybody who we'd love to have you come and be part of either the band version or orchestra or choir version that all happen simultaneously. This year it's July 16th through 18. So we'd love to have you be with us, but thanks.
Hey, Cecilia has something to share with the group.
You
Fire
know,
away.
we've been talking about lasagna, and don't get me wrong, I love me some pasta and some really great bread, but I have a sweet tooth. And so when I talk to my students about bringing musicianship to everything that they do, I always share with them a story about me as fifth grade Cecilia and my first crush. And his name was Chris White. And I thought that what I would do is bake Chris a cake. And y'all, I baked this cake with all of my heart. And from scratch, look, I don't bake anymore because of this incident. Because you know what I did? Y'all, how many cups of sugar go in a cake? I don't even know. I don't even know, because I don't even try anymore. Because that first time I baked a cake for Chris White, I baked it with sugar, not with sugar, with salt instead of sugar. Okay, right, Timmer? Exactly. And so I presented this cake with all my heart to my first crush in the parking lot outside of the church on Andrews Air Force Base. And he, of course, took that bite and he spit it out on the parking lot in front of me, broke my heart. Look, if we wait as if musicianship is the icing on the cake, it's too late. It's the sugar in the batter. And so I think, when you said, Phil, teach it in 6th grade. Yes, please. Yes, please. There is no reason why those students, when they first learn their embouchures and they exhale through that instrument, they are not using their ears and responding to the ensemble that they're listening to the very first exhale on their horn. If they learn that and that becomes a part of what they're doing, that they're always listening, responding, and making adjustments to that listening environment, my goodness gracious, the artists that they will become, just fantastic. But that's my story about my sweet tooth. Thank you, Steve, for letting me share it. And thank you so much, Phil, for all of your words. I will be using so many of them this week.
Yep. Great.
Outstanding.
I think you should have given Chris White a lasagna instead of a cake, and maybe it would have gone better.
Probably so.
All right, Brian, you got to share something before we
Yes, but Phil, I mean, if she had given him a lasagna, Patrick might really be disappointed. That's her husband right now. So And
Things
by the way,
worked
he had
out
a birth.
as they should, right, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. He had a birthday recently. Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, everyone here, you might not realize this, but well, we've all realized this for a long time. We are in the presence of greatness, but officially, Dr. Tim has been admitted into the hospital of the Hall of Fame for Phi Beta Mu Alpha chapter in Texas there. So congratulations, Dr. Tim. Long time coming, well deserved. Um, and we love you, and what a great recognition. Long overdue.
Absolutely. All right, Hall of Famer, back to you. Let's wrap this up.
Okay. Well, I mean, Phil, we could go on here forever. In fact, I wish we could. But again, when you went the 1, 2, 3 thing, I just will never forget that band director saying, as soon as we get all the notes and everything right, I'm going to have you come in and we'll work on their attitude. And here's the cart before the horse again. As soon as they learn all the music, then we'll start making art. You can play hot cross buns musically. And for all of you, and I think we'll get head nods on this, once they understand it's a language, they're going to run back to the rehearsal room all the time, because that's the only way you can speak and not be graded or degraded by people around you. You can say anything you want with your horn or your mallets or your voice or the strings, and it's a universal language, and we need it now more than we've ever needed it to bring people together. So Phil, just remarkable, as we knew it would be. So thank you. Back to you, Steve.
Well, and as I'll wrap this up, thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. And Phil, special thank you for being our guest. And maybe if you'll share that PowerPoint with us, we can put it on our website or something so people could have access to that, because I think everybody would appreciate that for sure, having that. And stay tuned for Crafting Culture. Looks like for sure Atlanta and probably El Paso. And so we're so excited about that. So stay tuned, and thank you, and make it a great week. And we'll see you in a couple weeks with, I think, Trish Cornett from Temple. Is that right? Will be our guest that night. Take care, everyone. Great to see you.
Happy spring breaking. Be safe, and serve that family now instead of that band or choir or orchestra.
Yep.
None.
Yep.
Thanks all. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.